This is Dialogue, a weekly conversation where creativity meets technology. This episode of Season 1 is brought to you by Astropad and Hello. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You know, last week we finished up with Carrie Patel, who's a narrative designer at Obsidian Entertainment, and also the author of the Recoleta series of novels. And I don't know about you, Federico, but I really find the process of long-form writing, and in particular fiction writing, fascinating, especially coming from a background as we do, writing more about technology and not delving into fiction at all.
Yeah.
And so I thought what we would do today is we would kind of continue down that similar path. And we have with us today to dive deeper into that world, Pierce Brown, who's the author of the Red Rising series of novels. The first book in the series was published in 2014. And as this episode is published, the most recent fifth installment called Dark Age has just been published. Welcome to the show, Pierce.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate you joining us today. I want to dive right in and just start asking you, especially with Dark Age just coming out as we release this episode, what is the lead up to releasing a new book like that like for you?
Very little sleep.
I bet.
It's funny because, I mean, every author has deadlines, and I do as well because they need to do that to basically light a fire under you sometimes. But
Sure.
It was a little too ambitious for this most recent book, and I think that more has to do with the scope that I've embraced in Dark Age, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a second. But it basically is, you get your manuscript in and you go through about 3 to 4 rounds of copy edits where they, look at your manuscript with a telescope and a magnifying glass to see if there are plot holes, if there are typos, which inevitably there are. And they always sneak through, and they're like, the little burrs in your saddle that just get under your butt for years. Because I still have old copies of Red Rising floating around out there, first edition, second editions, etc. that people read and are just like covered with myriad of typos. So you go through that process, and then you start kind of doing your social media schedule in this new day and age, which is every 4 or 5 days you have a different sort of event that you're kind of putting on, some sort of sweepstakes sometimes, some sort of choose one howler out of the group of people that submit things. And because of that, you're trying to drum up, there's social media grassroots movement, which is kind of still what moves books, So a lot of it is slow gears kind of get rolling. But after you finish and turn in your last the manuscript and the last round of copied notes on it, you really do have this kind of gulf, which is about 2 months for me, 3 months, depending on my schedule, where I haven't done anything with the book. And so it's weird because you've already put it aside, you've already closed, you've already finished it somehow, some way you persevered. And now they expect you to go on tour for it and sell it. And you're like, I don't know how to do that. So it is a gearing up process. So what happens then, today and moving forward will be Dark Age tour in about 14 cities, and then a bit up in Canada, and getting to meet readers and kiss babies. If anyone is unwise enough to read the book to their baby, which I don't necessarily recommend, they bring them to signing. So I've kissed a few babies. I've met a few Darrows, met a few Paxes. Yeah, it's been a fun time. But basically, it's like it's kind of shaking yourself back into the mode to live inside your book, because it's funny when you put a close on it. And here I'm rambling a little bit, so be prepared, boys. When you put a pin in a book, you kind of leave it behind because I'll probably never read Dark Age again. But then you talk about it for, 14 days in a row, and it's kind of this weird, almost like dreamlike experience for me, at least.
All right, we want to talk about Dark Age, of course. We want to talk about your relationship with readers. But before we do that, I want to back up a little. So in case some of our listeners are not familiar with the Red Rising series, how would you describe it?
Oh, my elevator pitch. After all these years, you'd think I would have mastered it. I would say that it is a world where humanity has expanded into the solar system, but modeled itself in 2 different ways. One based on a hierarchy of colors. And what I mean by that is eugenic programs. So you are literally made for your task. And it's a somewhat strict social caste hierarchy in what you can do. And there's 14 different colors. The bottom is red. The top is gold. Golds initially started as shepherds, but have, like any empire, tended towards tyranny. And it's about a red who is infiltrating the Golds in a society in an attempt to bring them down. So it's one part kind of Monte Cristo, one part Star Wars, one part Braveheart, and a hell of a lot of ancient Rome.
So I remember, I think, watching or reading an interview that you did a while back, a couple of years ago, and you mentioned that sort of the impetus to start writing for you came in high school when a friend of yours passed away. And I remember you saying that sort of that experience forced you inward, and you sort of spend more time alone, spend some time away from technology. And I wanted to ask you, can you elaborate on that, moving away from technology and sort of what happened in that period of time?
Sure. I think that, whenever life is proven to be as fragile as it is, you start taking stock of what's important. And for me, it wasn't a conscious decision. It was simply a return to the status quo. And what I mean by that is how I was as a child. We moved around 8 different states. I went to 12 different schools growing up. And because of that, you're constantly getting thrown into new class hierarchies, new jungles, right? And having to work your way up to get friends or, have even people know who you are. And I spent so much time trying to, make new friends, trying to get into every new system, like, new sports teams, new debate teams, new teachers, new classrooms, that it slowly pulled me away from what was kind of in my DNA, which is being outside, exploring the woods, digging foxholes, building forts. I mean, that's the kind of thing I grew up doing. We lived up in Iowa and had this couple 100-acre wood in our backyard. And I would just schlep around in that. My dad would give me a call on the walkie-talkie and tell me it was time for dinner. So I didn't have any technology in my life. And then slowly but surely we got drawn into the city. And that meant more technology, more social media, because that was kind of the early days of like AOL Instant Messenger. I'm sure you guys remember that. And it wasn't quite Instagram and Facebook level, but I just realized I was becoming, more what the world wanted me to be than what I wanted to be. So I just took a step back from pretty much everything and started writing, reading more. And I think that was around 18. And then we moved shortly after to Washington State, which is just, beautiful beautiful temperate rainforests and incredible, lakes and mountains. And so it really kind of woke that up. And I just started writing pretty much nonstop until I got Red Rising published.
And before Red Rising, you wrote 6 books. And I think
right.
The story goes that you wrote them above your parents' garage in Seattle.
Yeah, that was one of the places. Yeah. For some reason my life is like gravitated towards garages. I don't know what it is, but I wrote Red Rising in my parents' garage, and then I ended up moving to LA to be an NBC page. Like Kenneth from 30 Rock. So I had the peacock tie and everything. But during that point, I couldn't afford rent, so I was living in the garage of my political science professor after college. So I've kind of bounced around a bit on garages and air mattresses. But yeah, I wrote 6 books and various stages of good, bad, and all in between. You do a lot of emulating of kind of your heroes in your first books, and then you find your voice. But I think that a lot of it I consider to be almost my own personal writing seminar, because I certainly learned how not to write a book.
And in the first Red Rising book, and I guess this goes back to the idea of what you just mentioned about moving a lot. At a very high level, the first book is about Darrow, who starts out as a slave and eventually wants to destroy an empire from within because the girl he loved was taken from him, and realizes during the book that he's been lied to the whole time, and he discovers the society and all of that. So this idea of you have this sort of this social outcast, and you have this theme of adversity. I just wanted to ask you, how much of your life and your experiences do you see in that character in the first book, and sort of how, I guess, the evolution of Darrow maybe took a different path from your own personal experience and became something else? What's your relationship with that character?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't toppled an empire yet. I'm planning on it and developing the skill sets. But they say write what you know, but it's not exactly like, you're a fisherman, so you have to be right about fishing books. It's right about the emotions. Mine was always breaking into new social systems. I mean, I was at one school in Iowa, which was a public school, farmers' kids, local shop owners, etc. And then I moved to Dallas, and went to this weird private school there where there's like three or four kids in my class of 80 were billionaires. And it's like culture shock, you know? So that's kind of the thing I channeled into Darrow, is this place is one, culture shock, being a fish out of water. Two, this sense of kind of not vendetta, but I would say sense of alienation from the society he has to pretend to be a part of and then rise within. So I guess it mirrors it to a degree, but it also mirrors, like, when I look at Red Rising, I don't look at it as like a personal journal entry. I look at it more as my love letter to my fascination with history, because Red Rising is just playing with themes that have been used throughout history. And, you know, if history or time or empires or whatever are on a wheel, it always comes around, and the patterns are much the same. And so with Red Rising, I thought it would be fun to infuse a fresh, I guess, look on those kind of age-old themes of why empires fall, about, you know, racism and classes being divided, and plutocracy turning into tyranny, those kind of things. So in many ways, it was just that love letter to the books I read as a kid and to the ideas that were always kind of popping around.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier the influence of, you know, Roman mythology and history and that sort of thing, as well as Greek mythology. You know, how do those things play into the books?
Pretty hugely, because the idea behind the society, this big empire that spans the solar system, is that it is founded on humanism, not on expansion of technology. So they don't use, you know, drones or robots to mine their ore or to perform their carnal desires. They use human beings because they believe that humans are important. And so they tailor these human beings through genetic programs, etc., to be perfectly suited for their task. And that humanism comes from my reading of, you know, Plato's Republic, Pico della Mirandola's treatise on the dignity of man. And there's all these kind of beautiful, I would say, signposts that the evil golds within my story use that were kind of luminary for a lot of my life. So they're all the classics, you know, the ones you read, like Aeschylus, Socrates. They quote them while they're killing people. So for me, that makes it really fun, because I get to go do a deep dive into the stuff I read maybe in 9th grade and then become obsessed with, and then somehow create a mirror into their society. Because the Republic by Plato is the basis of the whole government system within Red Rising, because it's, you know, Plato posits that in Republic, he's having a dialogue where he's trying to identify what the perfect way to groom leaders for the perfect city-state would be. And he comes up with this idea called philosopher kings. And philosopher kings are people who are the brightest. They don't have to necessarily come from the brightest, like from the wealthiest families or anything like that. In fact, it's better if they don't. But they are the best, the brightest, the smartest. And then they have a curriculum where they're supposed to learn certain prerequisites for rule or for authority. And then everyone else beneath them is supposed to tailor their job or seek out what they are best suited for. So it's like a man of iron is suited for a task of iron, so tilling the fields. A man of copper, etc., is suited for this task. And so that's kind of where I got the idea for it, and then twisted it to, you know, this ridiculous monstrosity, which is the Golden Empire.
This episode of Dialogue is brought to you by Astropad Studio. Astropad Studio turns your iPad into a completely customizable graphics tablet. With Astropad, you can combine the power of the Apple Pencil with your favorite Mac apps right on your iPad. The makers behind Astropad understand that no two artists work alike. That's why they've packed Astropad with opportunities to customize every aspect of your workflow, with features like programmable gestures, custom pressure curves, and unlimited per-app shortcuts. They literally designed Astropad from the ground up for professional artists. Astropad also guarantees low latency performance over both Wi-Fi and a USB cable, so you can set up your workspace on the go. It's a high-performance tool for the most demanding creative work, and today Astropad is used by major animation studios and product design firms across the globe. So, if you're ready to take your creative workflow to the next level, you can start your free 30-day trial of Astropad Studio today. Just visit astropad.com to get started. Again, that URL, it's astropad.com to get started. Our thanks to Astropad Studio for their support of Dialogue. I want to back up a little bit to the books before Red Rising, because as Federico pointed out, you worked on 6 books before you got Red Rising published. I was wondering, were those books you were trying to get published as well, or was Red Rising the first time you actually started going out to see if you could get a book published?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Trying, but not very successfully, apparently. I think that they were like me trying to learn how to write a book. It's trial and error because I didn't take any classes to write. I certainly wasn't allowed into AP English when I was younger. And so I've always kind of bucked against the idea that someone can teach you how to write. So there's all these writing programs and, they might work for some people, but for me, they didn't. At least in thought, like if someone has to teach you to do it, and there's so many other people who are good at writing naturally, if someone has to teach you, I thought that it wasn't necessarily for me. I was either good at it or not. And so I wrote 6 books stubbornly. And the first one actually was this huge epic fantasy, which I got an offer for, and then got so cocky thinking, this isn't the book I really want to be my debut. And I think I was 19 then. And then it was about 3 more years before I'd get another offer on a book. So I said no way too quickly, it seems.
Yeah. Did you ever revisit those books and think about maybe polishing them up and trying to publish them?
Oh, God, sometimes. Oh, no way. No way. So I've reread them occasionally. Like I just moved house and I have been going through my old, analog documents. So I find this huge tome wrapped up in cloth and I open it. It's, a book I wrote when I was 18 and I start reading it. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm trying to use so many big words. So no, man, it's sometimes excruciating to go back into that. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you have projects that you go look back on and you can see like about 13 to about 40% of it works and the rest of it has to be redone. But the spirit of creation's kind of left you already. You're on to greener pastures in a way. So that's how I feel about it.
So how much did you know? So you start writing Red Rising, and I just wonder, how much did you know how it was going to end while you were writing the first book? Or was it just like, let's see where it goes? Or did you actually have a whole plan sketched out?
I did not have a plan. I'm what they call a pantser, if we're using that term. You guys familiar with that term? The pantser versus planter type thing?
Yeah, I've read it before. Yes.
Yeah. So like some people are, architects. I think of it as more as architects and then like Jackson Pollock paintings. So I think there's architects out there who are doing these beautiful outlines. I have a friend, Peter V. Brett, who does 200, maybe 300 page outlines for his books. And it's like an excruciating detail. We're talking about dialogue, emotional shifts, secondary, tertiary plot lines, emotional arcs, all these things, pacing notes. Little details and scenes, keeping track of all the items everyone has. And for me, that I can't do that because then I lose the whole point of writing, which is for me catharsis. So I tried coming up with a plan for Random House in these last books, and then I ended up just kind of writing as I was coming up with it on the spot. So I've always been literally enter the day with no plan, except knowing I need to get out of a scene and I need to set something else up and see where I go.
All right, I want to shift gears a little and talk about the sort of the business aspect of having a popular book series and having a lot of fans all over the globe. And in fact, I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about knowing that the Red Rising series has been translated in so many different languages? And have you tried reading any of those translations?
Yeah, the Spanish version. The funny thing with translation, I'm like incredibly OCD. And very, very obsessed with detail in the books and everything being right in the right turn of phrase. And to be honest, I drive my copy editors in America insane because when I'm using certain diction or phrases in the books, I eliminate words that we would use. So I like some sentences will just not have like an of or the in there. So they're technically incorrect sentences, but they sound right for their world. And so when it's translated, I lose control of that because I certainly can't, check the fidelity of the translation, especially with 33, 37 translations. So much of it's taken on faith, and you hope you have a good translator. And so I know for certain languages have translators which people rave about, and other translations don't. And figuring that out is just me relying upon the native speakers of the tongue. But fortunately, the world is so flat now with the internet. I can get updates and keep track of my translators. So it's kind of great. But I know that, for instance, my Polish translator is extremely into the books, and it kind of shows in the translation. So that's one of the better ones. And then there are certain kind of gems that rise up in the translations, which people have become obsessed about. But a lot of native speakers of a different language will also read in English, so they kind of give me a report on which one they like better.
Yeah, that's what I did. And I can tell you that in Italian, the titles would roughly translate to, so Red Rising would be The Forbidden Song. Golden Sun would be Darrow's Secret. And Morning Star would be The Reaper's War. So that's kind of cool. The Reaper's
Interesting.
War.
Darrow's Secret sounds a little tawdry. I'm just saying, it kind of is a bodice ripper, guys.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, we're expecting some sensuality in a book like that.
So let me ask about another aspect of having a popular series, which would be, merchandise and special editions and extras. And I would like to know, to what degree are you involved in all of these extra elements surrounding the books?
Well, it gets to, early on I was very involved, then it gets to a point where you have to delegate far more. So fortunately, I have a lot of people around me who were with me initially from the get-go before I even had a book deal. My agent, Hannah Bowman, and even my editor at Del Rey, Mike Braff, who's now at Skybound. They're usually very good consigliere in figuring out, if something is jeopardizing of the brand, because now you have to think of things like that. You have to be holistic because, what they don't tell you is you're basically an entrepreneur when you're writing books, because so much of the marketing, is based on what you do, as is most of the merchandising, because you don't want to give away valuable rights. But it's as things grow larger, you lose more control. But hopefully you just create items or merchandise which, has some fidelity to the actual world you see in your head. The symbols being real, the symbols that are in Darrow's world in Red Rising. Because we do a lot of pins and jewelry with Badali Jewelry, and they do these, like these really nice, like $400 rings.
I have one of those.
Like beautiful silver. Yeah, they're gorgeous. They're Institute rings. See, I got one too, so now we're united, buddy. And so I try to keep it the authorized dealers. I try to keep it only have maybe two or three, because I want some sort of quality control, and it just starts spinning out of control as soon as you start giving the rights away to more and more people. So for me, it's at this point, it's far less about, merchandising and actually maximizing revenue from those rights. Instead, it's about protecting the IP and making sure you don't bastardize your own material. And I think that, we're in a world now where everyone is trying to, I would say, monetize everything. And I think that's kind of a shame. Because then you get, you get Anakin Skywalker on, a Pepsi cup at Taco Bell. But what does that mean? Does that thin out the world, or does it make it more real, more interesting, and a better story? I'd hazard to say it thins out the world. So I don't ever want to see, Red Rising on a Pepsi cup. But then again, if Red Rising's on a Pepsi cup, all my worldly problems are solved. So maybe I do want to see that. I don't know. It's a mixed bag.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. So what degree, you talked a little bit about book tours and that sort of thing. What about things like conventions and more those kind of direct interactions with fans? Are you involved in that at all?
I am, and I love conventions. However, they do take time away from doing my job, which is writing. And that's kind of my happy place. And so I go to about 3 to 4 conventions a year, usually San Diego Comic-Con, Denver Comic-Con, because my folks are out there now. So it's nice getting to 2 birds, 1 stone that. And right. I go to Phoenix Comic-Con sometimes, and because they have really, really amazing books set up there, where the crowd that comes is far more directed towards authors than it is comic books or video games or what have you that comes at San Diego Comic-Con. Because San Diego Comic-Con has just grown larger and larger and larger. Do you guys go to that every year, or have you been yet?
We have not. I'm going to be in LA when the San Diego one's going on this year, and I was thinking about trying to get there because it sounds like it's just crazy and huge.
Yeah, if you can get there, it's really fun. It's about 175,000 people packed in there, and it's wild. The cosplay you see is profound. The The atmosphere is great. You know, it's a lot of people rubbernecking things. Like you'll walk through the alleys there. So these alleys full of human beings walking down on the floor there, and everyone's looking at something. So everyone's colliding into everything and everyone, but everyone is so polite at Comic-Cons. You know, there might be some unwashed people there. There might be some interesting people there, but everyone is pretty polite. So it's kind of this weird fraternal culture there, while they're all still competing to get in the same lines. So it's an interesting program down at San Diego. It's not necessarily my favorite. I think my favorite might be either Phoenix or Emerald City Comic-Con.
This episode of Dialogue is brought to you by Hello. Have you ever tried a buckwheat pillow? I have. I've been using a Hello pillow for about 9 months now, and I absolutely love it. It's got the exact right amount of head neck support because it's more like a beanbag than your traditional pillow. It's not filled with foam or feathers or anything like that. It's got this buckwheat hull filling that molds to your body and is perfect for a comfortable night's sleep. It doesn't get hot either in the same way that other pillows do. And I don't find myself folding it up to try to get the right thickness or support or flipping it to find the cool side. It's absolutely fantastic that way. And you know what? These pillows, which are manufactured here in the United States, this kind of pillow has been used for absolute centuries. It's been used in Japan for a really long time. And you can go to some of the fanciest hotels around the world and find these kind of pillows on pillow menus. I've never personally been to a hotel with a pillow menu, but I'd like to go to one someday. And I'd be really happy to find a buckwheat pillow because I've had a great experience with my Hello pillow so far. So I want to tell you about the deal that they've got for listeners of Dialogue. You can sleep on a Hello pillow for 60 nights. And if the Hello pillow isn't for you, just send it back and they'll give you a complete refund. To let them know that you came from this show, please go to this website. It's hellopillow.com/dialogue. That's HULLOPILLOW.com/dialogue. If you try more than one pillow, you get a discount too of up to $20 per pillow, depending on the size that you get. There's also fast, free shipping on every single order, and 1% of the proceeds goes to the Nature Conservancy, which is really fantastic. All right, that URL again is hellopillow.com/dialogue. Go there and check it out and learn more. Our thanks to Hello for supporting Dialogue.
When you go to these conventions and you're able to meet up with all kinds of different fans of your work, readers of the Red Rising series, I'm guessing that at some point you realized that even perhaps unexpectedly, what you wrote, what you created, had on different people different kinds of personal impact.
Sure.
Maybe somebody, sees something special in, I don't know, Lyria from Iron Gold, for example. So I just wondered, do you now feel perhaps more than when you got started, sort of a responsibility in terms of what ideas, what themes will people take away from this, and sort of how do you approach that?
It's almost a bigger question than you even can think when you ask it, because so many little anecdotes come to mind. Because when you're just writing a book, you're just writing it for yourself. At least I am. I'm writing it because I need to be entertained. And then when your ridiculous story about spaceships and eugenics and power armor starts affecting people's actual lives, it becomes a whole different thing, and it takes on that weight, like you're talking about, that responsibility. Because the amount of letters I've gotten or the amount of fans I've had tell me about, they were reading it with their father when he was suffering from cancer, for instance. And it was the last thing they got to do together, is read Golden Sun or Morning Star, the second or third book. It becomes really important to understand, for me, the weight that people put on experiences, whether it be music or books or movies. We center so much about who we are on who we share those experiences with. And so what I found is, the book has been I've gotten a lot of people say the book has been inspirational for them, like to get into writing. But the stories that really get me are the ones where, sadly, it almost always revolves around an ill loved one. They're not able to do much more, but engage in the one thing they love the most, which is reading. And the ability to give any kind of escape to people who are, having a hard time or suffering is probably my favorite thing I didn't expect about being a writer. Because, you assume I have a lot of books that are important to me, but it almost seems impossible that I can make a book that is important to someone else on a real level, not just entertaining, but important on a, mental and emotional and like spiritual level. So like that sort of responsibility, I think, it's what keeps me writing when I'm bored of a book. Because you always get bored. So it keeps me writing when I don't necessarily know if I have anything else to say. And then you find something you do have to say. And so it's kind of all over the board. It depends on each anecdote. It depends on how the book finds someone. There's a 12-year-old last Comic-Con who came up and told me that he started reading my books and it was what got him into reading. And that's like the biggest thing as well, because I remember there were probably a handful of books which turned me into a reader and also turned me into more of a thinking person. And I think that's the benefit of books is you're engaged in the story. You're an active participant. You're not letting it flow over you like you do a movie. And you can be a fan of a movie. You can love a movie. Hell, I love Star Wars and Indiana Jones and Lawrence of Arabia, Blade Runner, all those things. But books are so much more an intimate relationship, I think, because everything you see has to be filtered through your mind's eye. So it really is the eye of the beholder. So every time someone reads a book of yours, they're connecting with you on a way because they're having to populate it with what they think the people look like, what they think that the world looks like, what they believe a terraformed Mars would look like. And that kind of unique connection can't exist in any other medium, I don't think. Because in sculpture, painting, you're showing them what it looks like. Movies, you're showing them. Music, I think, is kind of like maybe the closest comparison, but you're not telling the same depth and stories there all the time. So it is a great connection. And when I get to meet the readers at Comic-Cons, it does texturize the world more. In many ways, it makes the Red Rising world feel more real to me because I'm seeing it through their mind's eye instead of through mine. And it's wholly different, but no less real or no less vivid.
Well, that was a great answer. Thank you.
Good, I got one.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that you're gonna have thoughts on the next question, because another way, I guess, to engage with fans, with readers, is through social media.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent do you rely on that?
Well, the tried and true method of selling books throughout time has been word of mouth. Word of mouth is what gives book legs, because books and the publishing community doesn't have the sort of resources to make a splash, that like blockbuster movies do, for instance, or video games. They don't have hundreds of millions in marketing budgets for single books. And social media simply makes it easier for word of mouth to spread. So people are not only learning about books through their friends and their family, they're learning about it through, chat rooms, Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, maybe even Twitch live streams now, because there's a big cult of video game announcers and video game enthusiasts who like the books. And so what it does is it makes my job a lot easier, because, in the publishing community, what you had is a dip where everyone thought that books were going to become antiquated and everyone was going to stop reading. And there was a real fear that the book world itself would diminish and shrink. And it has shrunken, but it's also expanded a bit. And this is, kind of parlays into the conversation about audiobooks. But you've seen a resurgence in reading because people can share more through things like Goodreads. People can expand their community. And so what you have is word of mouth, grassroots movements that instead of me going to a Comic-Con, I can sit on my computer and be more effective and get more readers. That said, I'm not an avid consumer of social media. So it is a mixed bag because it kind of pulls me out of my mental pocket, because I like pretending I'm still, in the 1940s in a lot of ways, like just the things I do and the activities I enjoy. So getting on my Twitter, getting on my Instagram isn't necessarily, how do I say this? It isn't necessarily embracing all the things that make me, but it is a great way to connect with fans. I far prefer doing it in person, because then you can actually have a real conversation.
So this actually means that you do read through some of the fan theories on the Reddit sometimes.
Not on the Reddit. I don't go on the Reddit.
Okay.
I went on the Reddit originally like 4 years back and found that it was kind of deleterious to my process because my problem as a pantser is okay. You know that Robert Frost poem, two paths in a woods diverge,
Right.
or two roads in a woods diverge, and my life is constantly that when I'm writing. It's like, ooh, I could go down this path with the character, or I could go down this path. But then if I read fan theories, I'm like, I could go down 30 paths. And so that's really bad when I'm like define every scene. I don't have like an outline. Every scene I have to decide in the moment. And so if I get inspired by something that I read on Reddit or, chat room, then all of a sudden I'm hijacking my story because every decision every decision we make is based upon this huge reservoir of subconscious detail. And if all of a sudden you get an injection, it's like a relationship, when you all of a sudden someone adds their 2 cents in your relationship. Well, that's when your partner comes back all hot and bothered, after a night drinking with the girls and says, I think that we need to, take a look at how we communicate with each other. And it's like, oh, she got outside advice. It's like, so it throws off the narrative. And it's like, those moments, like just a girls' night turns into you guys having like a heart to heart at 2 a.m. on the couch. And that's kind of stuff I'm trying to avoid. So I try to like basically avoid all fan theories as much as possible because some of them are really good and some of them make me feel like I should have gone that path instead of down the path I went. And I'm like, damn it, that person had a genius idea. So yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag. I prefer to get their thoughts on things that have happened already, or them comparing who the best razor master in the society is, who would win in an all-out fight, that kind of thing. It more for diversion than for actual gleaning plot details from them.
Sure. I want to see if you could expand on Goodreads a little bit, because whenever I go looking for information about a book, boy, Goodreads is always at the top of the Google search. And I just kind of wonder, what influence does Goodreads have on someone like yourself?
Well, it's interesting. I initially used it as a consumer for a little while and then found that I like consuming my books and my art in a cone of silence. Like, I don't need someone telling me that the Iliad sucks. The Iliad's an awesome, awesome book and like a foundational corner of Western literature, but it's got like a 3.75 on Goodreads. So you got to take everything with a grain of salt because that's bogus. That book is awesome. And it literally has a 3.75. My books have rank higher than it. My books aren't better than the Iliad. So I don't know, this crowdsourcing of reviews in and of itself, you got to take with a grain of salt and find what you like. And, I'm a little fearful that all it does, that it can tend towards homogenizing the reading experience. So the books that are popular get more popular and the books that aren't, struggle to find footing.
Right.
And so while I'm wary about that side of it, Goodreads is a good resource for finding books liked by people that like similar books to you. So it's kind of like, when you're on YouTube and you're going down a procrastination wormhole and you're like watching, for me, it's Russian road rage incidents. I'll just watch Russian road rage incidents all day. It's so amazing. So then they'll be like, you might also like, and then I click that video. I'm like, I do like this video as well. Good job, YouTube. And so that's what Goodreads does. It's like, oh, I might like this book too. Let's explore it. Oh, I do like this book. How lovely. So it's great for that feature. But for communicating with people, I still feel like, Messenger is the best, like some sort of like Instagram or Facebook thing.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I want to talk to you a little bit about the inspiration for your books. Where do you look for inspiration?
Man, you don't look for it. If you're doing it right, it's osmosis. You surround your things with the things that you like, and then it'll bleed into your book. That's how I look at it. Because if the second I start doing like mad research, because I'll buy like 9 books on Norse mythology. And then I'll sit there reading them. And then all of a sudden I want to write a book about more Norse mythology instead of a book about space, space Romans. And so, yeah, I try not to do too deep a dive because then I'll hijack my own story because I get so enthusiastic. But I try to rely on this kind of reservoir I've built up over the years of reading things between books and stuff like that in terms of research. If that was the question. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. But for me, research is like an ongoing thing. You're always looking to fill it up. I mean, Stephen King has this great quote where he says that, I'm going to butcher it, but for an author, reading is your gas. How are you supposed to drive anywhere without any gas? So you better be reading every day. And I agree with that philosophy, even if it's hard to follow.
do you feel like maybe, I don't know, especially in recent years, that maybe subtle political commentary is something that informs some aspects of your books?
Not really. It's not intentional in terms of like mirroring our political climate. Because think, I wrote Red Rising in 2011. Yet it taps in pretty. There's a lot of parallels, I'll say, with the current social justice movements that you see happening throughout the world. And I find that as a very good thing because, you know, the arc of history bends toward justice if we're going to use the Martin Luther King quote. And I think that is true so long as we understand that, you know, history doesn't, justice doesn't have a gravity of its, you know, own accord. We have to be the ones pushing it. So the books reflect my kind of social understanding. And there, you know, there's, for instance, there's a lot of strong female characters in my books, but I didn't tend to write it that way. I just grew up with a badass mom and like terrifying women in my family who aren't to be crossed, and simply made them like superhuman killing machines in the book. And so it's not me trying to mirror any of the social movements. And instead just write the thing which I'm inspired by. You know, my mom, for instance, was one of the first women to run a TV station in the United States and grew up during an era where misogyny and sexual harassment were part of the job. And seeing how she triumphed over that is hugely influential for my life, because I was getting these Time's Up and Me Too stories when I was like, you know, 14, 13 from my mom. So she created almost like, you know, this baseline code of conduct in my moral DNA, which spreads over to the stories about who's interesting, who are we following in the story. And there's no difference in terms of, you know, gender about who's important to the story, because we just follow all the characters. I mean, there's probably like 100 characters in Dark Age, and it's probably an even split between men and women. I'm not sure. I've never really looked at it, but it kind of just parrots what my parents raised me to know and to be interested in. So when I talk about researching for a book, osmosis plays such a huge part of it, because you're just basically always acquiring things. That's what our brains are. We're just sponges. And being able to have a job where you sit down and all you're doing is spending time alone and trying to draw back on, to create new worlds based on your experiences, is simply using your memories, using the life you have, using the opinions of other people, the morals other people have given you, the moral frameworks you see your friends have, and then contextualizing it in a story. So I look at like the research of an author or an artist should be happening all the time. Even last night, like I had friends over last night, and you end up being a fly on the wall. I mean, I became a writer because I'm basically an alien in the room all the time. I always feel like, you know, if I go to a party or something, I'm always thinking that everyone's looking at me or that I don't belong and everyone else is having such a great time. And that's just because I'm like, my mind's too busy and I'm trying to break down the social mechanics going on, I guess. And so for me, the researching is never done. And the social element of the books and the veiled social critical critique, I think, is somewhat incidental, because these are all things we've seen before. We've seen populist movements before. We've seen populist movements, you know, every 80 years at least in the broader scheme of Western politics. But throughout the world, they're always happening. And so with Red Rising and this new book, you know, Dark Age and Iron Gold, we're exploring more of the populist movement, what that means, like populist socialist movements against, you know, different other forms of government. So in Dark Age, you're seeing basically 6 or 7 different forms of government kind of go at it with each other. And it's really fun because it does mirror the current political climate to a degree, but I'm basing it more off of Arab Spring. And Arab Spring was happening when I was writing the first books. So it's funny because everyone wants, this is how we are built, like meant just as human beings. We think of everything as a reflection on our current time. Like, you know, with Tolkien, when he was writing Lord of the Rings, everyone wanted to make it a veiled critique of World War II, or, you know, the evil rising in the East being representative of Nazi Germany. But Tolkien avidly rejected those comparisons and said he was just writing a story. But he could have been subconsciously motivated by it. Hell, the guy served in World War I. And so I think that a lot of it is subconscious. So maybe there's some social critique in there. I'm not sure. But I think what's more important to me than kind of sniping at certain presidents or sniping at certain political parties right now is addressing the overall structural framework of human beings and why we're this way. That's what books should do. And that's what science fiction and fantasy, to me, that's kind of their superpower. Science fiction and fantasy, they can draw parallels and talk about politics and analyze why things happen and why people are the way they are and what, I think the right sort of governance is without people counter arguing. So like, I think that my job is to present the idea, but not draw conclusions to the idea. Like present the arguments for both sides and then let it play out in the story, but not stand on a soapbox and say, this is how you do it. Republicans are wrong. Democrats are wrong. No, it's not my cup of tea. It's more to like, let's explore the ideas and you can draw your own conclusions.
All right, Federico, I think that's a good place to stop for today. We're going to pick up next week again with the second half of our interview with Pierce Brown, the author of the Red Rising series of novels. And we'll talk about all sorts of things, including his writing process and Dark Age, which is the book that was just released, his most recent novel. I'll talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.